Good day, and welcome to Lesson 11 in your study of the book of Daniel. So we finished the first 6 chapters, and those chapters pretty well tell us in a summary form the history of Daniel, how he was taken as a youth from his home in Jerusalem, taken as a slave to Babylon, and then how he spent the rest of his life in a foreign culture, serving foreign kings, but yet remaining loyal to God, remaining loyal to his faith, and remaining loyal to his people, and in many ways influenced the outcome of the history of the Jewish nation. So the first 6 chapters gave somewhat of a chronological order of Daniel's life, how it ended under Cyrus, the king of Persia. These next few chapters tell us more about some of the prophecies and some of the visions that Daniel had and some of the interpretations. So we go back in time a bit to look at some of these visions and some of these prophecies which Daniel gave, the visions he had for himself and what he gave to others. So we start chapter 7, and I'll read the first few verses of this. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed, and then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. So this is a vision that Daniel had, very similar in a sense to the dream and vision that Nebuchadnezzar had, as reported in chapter 2. Except this time it was Daniel having the dream, Daniel having the visions. And whereas the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had caused him great distress and great turmoil, these dreams that Daniel had also caused him considerable turmoil as well. Because it says in verse 15, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. So these visions troubled him the same way that the visions that Nebuchadnezzar had troubled him. And in a way they were parallel to each other, because it says in chapter 7, Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, the 4 winds are often thought to be the changes that take place, the very things that happen in the world and in the earth and in the universe. So the 4 winds stirred up, troubled, caused confusion. And it says had a vision of this stirring up the great sea. The great sea could be just a symbol of anything, but some people say it was a symbol of the Mediterranean Sea because Daniel bordered on that sea. But it says there was some trouble in the universe. There was some trouble because the 4 winds stirred up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. Then he goes on to describe these beasts. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched until its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. The symbol of a winged lion was very common in Babylon, and it was felt that this vision really represented Babylon the same way that the golden head of the Colossus of Nebuchadnezzar's dream represented Babylon. The winged lion was a symbol of the Babylonian Empire, and in fact some of the statues of the winged lions of Babylon are still present in the British Museum today. But this vision showed these winged lions having the wings plucked off, becoming humbled, being made much less than they normally would be, being plucked off, made weaker. His wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. This is believed to be representing the time when Nebuchadnezzar became mad and was made to act like an animal. It says a man's heart was given to it because the king of Babylon did have a change in heart after he had this episode, as recorded earlier in this book. So this was felt to represent Babylon, again as the golden head did in the colossus of Nebuchadnezzar's vision. So this was the first beast. This troubled Daniel. He saw this beast coming up out of the sea, coming up out of the firmament, like a lion, but with eagle's wings, which were plucked off, and then it was lifted up and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. So this was referring, as far as everyone seems to consider, to Babylon. And then it said, another beast, a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It was more on one side than on the other. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. The torso of Nebuchadnezzar's dream was felt to represent Mede-Persia. And so this bear is also felt to represent Mede-Persia as well. The fact that it was lifted up on one side seems to signify that one of the 2 branches of the Mede-Persian Empire was stronger than the other. The Medes were not to the same strength or capability as were the Persians. And this seems to represent the fact that the bear was raised up more on one side than on the other. It had 3 ribs in its mouth. The Mede-Persians were known to have conquered 3 different aspects, 3 different empires. Lydia and Egypt were 2 of these, and there was another. So this was felt to represent that the 3 ribs, there were these 3 empires which the Medes Persians conquered, and they did it very savagely. They devoured much flesh. There was much killing and much anguish during this period of time. So this also was to represent the Mede-Persian Empire. So obviously this part of Daniel's vision represented a future to when Daniel was having this vision presented to him. And after this, he said, I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Where the bear is a brutish beast, a powerful, crushing beast. The leopard is a very sleek and very swift animal, and especially so if it had wings. And this again is meant to represent the Greek Empire, which followed the Mede-Persian Empire as it did in the vision of Nebuchadnezzar. The Greek Empire was an extremely fast-moving, especially under Alexander the Great, who by the age of 28 had conquered most of the known world. It is said that when he did this, he wept because he felt there were no more worlds left to conquer. He did this, the Greek expansion happened very rapidly, and therefore would be very well symbolized by a leopard, by a winged leopard. But the 4 heads, after Alexander the Great died, his empire was divided and quarreled over by his 4 generals. And this would be represented by the 4 heads of the leopard. And then he said he saw in his night vision a 4th beast, as dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth, devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. Again, as Nebuchadnezzar's vision of the iron legs represented Rome, it is felt that this too represents Rome. The fact that these visions are dealt with in symbolic and artful literature, artful words, is often wondered why, if there's going to be a vision, is it not just straightforward, given in a straightforward manner? Well, part of the reason at least was because in those days it was illegal. It was actually, it could be a death sentence to speak out against the empires and to speak out what was happening in the empire. And therefore, this book, as in the book of Revelation, because Rome was still in power at when the book of Revelation was written, it was written in symbolism. And it was written in types of words that people who were knowledgeable of what was happening could understand it, and those others would not. In much the same way in certain countries today, in Russia, for instance, it's unlawful to speak about war because of the situation. It can be considered a jail sentence to do that. So therefore, people who talk about war talk about it in a different language and in different aspects than they might otherwise speak. So this symbolism of another big beast, fierce beast, with powerful, would also be symbolic of the Roman Empire. And as the legs of the Nebuchadnezzar's vision ended up with 10 toes made of clay and iron, this vision had 10 horns. The vision in Nebuchadnezzar, the feet and the colossus were struck down by a rock, which then grew into a mountain. The rock which came without human hands. In this vision, instead of a rock, we have another horn, which came and plucked out or destroyed the horns which were previously there. And it said that it had the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking pompous words. It is felt by most that this refers to the Antichrist and refers to a time yet to come, where the rest of the vision has already taken place. This part has yet to be culminated. So Daniel's vision, first of all, he had this 4-beast vision of increasingly powerful and terrifying monsters, which devoured and crushed and overran everything before them. And then he said where this last beast developed into a type of a horn which became like a man, had eyes, and spoke very pompous words, and destroyed the other horns. So now the vision switches from earth to heaven, because now he says, I watched until thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was like a fiery flame, whose wheels of burning fire. Now much of this is very similar to what is in Revelation. If you go over to Revelation chapter 1, verse 14, it says, talking about this, the voice that spoke to John, it said, his head was hair were white as wool, as white as snow, and his eyes like a flame of fire. So the visions are very similar. Now don't forget, Daniel was written probably 500 or so years before John wrote Revelation. So there is a correlation which must have come because of the fact that these were visions which both men had, and both were similar in type. So it says, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. You go back to Revelation again, the same vision is seen in chapter 5. In verse 4 and verse 13, verse 11, where it says, I looked and heard the voice of many angels around the throne, the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. Exactly what it says here. Thousands ministered to him, 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. What you see are what you see is a vision of the human nations represented by these four beasts, or in Nebuchadnezzar's case, by the four parts of the great Colossus image. The four great empires that were represented by these images, and the one that was to come, which would be destroyed in Nebuchadnezzar's case by the rock turning into a mountain, and by Daniel's vision by this scene from heaven, which was going to judge these human nations. And this was a court in heaven. The books were opened. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. Mankind always has a type of feeling that we can say what we want, do what we want, act as we want, behave as we want. We are pompous towards God. And this is what it's saying, that the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain. The sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking, I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominions taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Even though the human nations, the human types of government will be overtaken by God's government, humanity as a whole will not be taken away for a period of time. And it says, I was watching the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Again, as was the vision of Nebuchadnezzar, which showed the rock turning into a mountain, representing a kingdom which would never be destroyed, so Daniel's vision shows heaven judging the human nations and then turning into a dominion and a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, never pass away. The visions are very much similar and parallel one to the other. So this was the vision of Daniel that he had during the first year of the reign of Belshazzar. He kept it to himself. He said, I was grieved. The visions troubled me. But he also said, he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts, but he kept it to himself primarily. So, this was Daniel's vision which troubled him. He could see the future being unveiled before him. And it was not what he considered to be, as far as humanity was concerned, a very pretty picture. So we have the first part of the vision on earth, the earthly kingdoms. The second part, a vision of heaven, of what is happening in heaven in response to what is happening on earth. And the dominion of Christ and of God being established forever. So this is the first part of chapter 7. We'll go into the second part of chapter 7 next week, into the vision interpretation, into the whole vision, the interpretation of these visions even further. So we'll leave that until next time, next week, and then we'll get back to finish off the second part of chapter 7. So I hope you've enjoyed this and that we see you again next week. Bye for now.